Now, if we were back in class, what we would do is we'd actually watch a documentary on this exact progression. It's called Irreplaceable. And in it, this guy, Tim Cicerich, goes out to try to understand what's wrong with the family in modern life. Like, why is it that the families seem to be on decline? And what he finds is this progression of devaluing that leads to decline. And that he just starts off with some general questions. He's seen some sociologists, some psychologists, some biologists. He even goes to a prison and tries to see what he can learn from there. He goes to marriage counselors. And he goes to radio hosts and authors and philosophers. And he is interviewing all these people. It's like, why is it that family life is in decline? And he comes up with this formula, the one that's on the board here, where when you devalue certain things, it leads to the devaluing of the next thing in this logical progression, where you ultimately end up devaluing life. And it's pretty crazy. So we're going to start with the first one and kind of work our way through. And again, I'm going to try to do this as fast as possible here. When we say devaluing the person, I don't mean in the sense of like Adolf Hitler considering certain people not worthy of life, right? And we're not talking about like this ultimate devaluing of the person. I don't care about anybody, but rather we're saying that like when you devalue the person as a unique individual with a will different than your own, right? When you think that everyone else that exists is sort of somehow existing for your own benefit, your own sake, right? Your entire lens by which you then view the world is distorted, which is clearly seen in this first example of devaluing sex. I won't go into it too much because we already went into it a little bit in the myths section of the class, and we're going to go into it a little bit more tomorrow when we talk about the hookup culture and what you can do to build up virtue against it. But the idea, and that's the picture at the bottom here of I typed in college party. Hopefully you don't go to too many parties quite like that. But when you devalue sex as something that is reserved for marriage in the sense that we were talking about, and you just say it's just whatever you want it to be, just a hookup that you're either not in control of, it's just your desires or what. When you devalue that, it has these long-term negative consequences that are going to lead beyond just that one moment, right? Now, you're not going to think about that probably when you're at this party. You're not going to think about that in high school. You're not going to think about that in college. And that's the whole point, right? We want you to start thinking about these things now, not so that like you reject good and natural sexual desires, but that you understand that no one is an island, right? And that's that first part too. That's why these are connected. That your private individual actions have societal effects. And that you saying, oh, well, this is just whatever. Like, I'm in high school, who cares? I'm in college, who cares? That mindset of who cares is the thing we're actually worried about. Yes, we're still worried about premarital sex and extramarital sex. But what we're really worried about is that devaluing of the person and devaluing of other persons, which then leads to the second one, or the third one if you want to count it, is the devaluing of marriage. This is kind of creepy. This is a divorce cake. I guess they've become more popular. And in this one, the woman is pushing the husband off of the top hat cake. Looks like she's also committing murder, but what have you, right? Now, with divorce, we've never had a 50% divorce rate. It's really around 40%. It's actually lower now. It dipped into the like 38%, but that's also because people are not getting married as much. So it's the stats are a little weird there. But obviously, when you devalue sex, you devalue marriage. When you think that either we said before that if marriage is just this emotional bond between two people or this romantic bond between two people, and that romance or that emotion fades, then you just get rid of the marriage. Well, that is going to have a big effect on children. If children grow up in a household where they see love not as ultimate self-gift through hardships, through death do us part, right? But they see love as just an emotional bond between two consenting adults. When they see divorce as common and commonplace, rather than seeing marriage and love as common, when they think that all that really exists is my individual will or my personal romantic desires, not the good of the other person, willing the good, the act of the will for the other person, well, then children grow up in an environment that's going to only reinforce and strengthen the negative perception of these things, right? Really, we're going to call it vice. And it's important to realize that like most of the time when you hear people getting divorced, they talk about their own personal feelings. You hear it a lot in celebrity culture, right? We grew apart. We're different people now. We're at different points in our lives. We couldn't make it work anymore. And really, with a few simple tools, anyone can kind of get over a lot of these irreconcilable differences. Um, I think I said this example before, but you wouldn't just abandon your best friendship over a couple arguments. You would start to work on them. And that if you've based, though, your entire relationship on just the romantic feelings, those desires, well, it can be more difficult to patch things up. Um, but there's also this, I guess the point that I'm trying to make is that most of the time when couples are getting divorced, it's not for the good or benefit of the children. It's to avoid some difficulty in their own individualistic personal life. And that's why I want to emphasize this pattern that if you start off with every person's an island, and that the only thing that matters, at least romantically, is my own romantic desires, and the only thing that matters within my marriage is my own personal happiness, and the only thing that matters then, if it is just my personal happiness, I can't really worry about my children. I've got to go be me. I've got to go pursue my dreams. And so then these children suffer, and then they repeat these same patterns. And so you can start to see how this has a societal life altering effect, right? That it's not just now you and this isolated island, but it's if the whole culture is based around this individualism, things get a little bit dicey. And that's what brings us to these two pictures here, which don't really have anything to do with marriage, but I think it's just a great example of where individualism leads to truly awful things, right? So this is Georgetown back in the day, and this still exists, but this is Georgetown's old library. And when they believed in truth, beauty, and goodness, the Transcendentals, they built this amazing, beautiful library. Now that they've largely abandoned those things and have really kind of abandoned their whole identity as a religious institution, and they're just, again, concerned with producing the highest ranking graduates for whatever programs, they built this monstrosity. This is their new library. This does not inspire a love of learning. I would never want to go study in a building that looks like this. I'm not trying to knock it, but when I was in grad school, I was still coaching at Jesuit, but also doing grad school online, and then in the summers, I went to LSU's library during a track meet. If you've ever been to track meets, they're really long. And I went to LSU's library to study, and it's really ugly. Like, it's really ugly. I don't know who would want to study in there. And I mean, Notre Dame had the same problem. Thank goodness we've renovated our library recently. But when you build these ugly buildings and then expect people to be inspired to learn, you can't be shocked when they don't want to be there. When you build something like this, you want to be in it. People knock a lot of the Catholic churches because they're ornate, right? The old ones. I'd much prefer to pray in a beautiful chapel than a concrete cylinder. And that's because human life desires truth, beauty, and goodness. And the connection that I want to try to draw here is that if you're only ever concerned with yourself, you're only concerned with your external advancement, right? Whether it's socioeconomic advancement, whether it's your titles that you're accumulating, right? Your accolades and awards. If it's only just your own personal happiness, you kind of end up on the inside, the interior of your soul, looking a lot more like this library than this library. And hopefully that'll make more sense when we get to the next slide. But again, it's really amazing if you look up the transformation of architecture in the last 100 years. I'd love to teach a whole class on architecture and stuff like that, but that's not the class. Okay, last slide for today, and this is it. What's the solution? The solution is to build up the virtues necessary to fill a positive view of these things, right? If you say a negative view is sort of the removal of truth, beauty, and goodness, the removal of relational view of humanity, well, how do we build that back up?